welcome back to Finding Fashion. Today I'm really happy to introduce Claire Etchell, who is a PR consultant and founder of Naked PR Girl. Thanks so much for joining me, Claire.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Oh, no, it's going to be great to talk to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry and what Naked PR Girl is all about?
So I've been working in the industry for, I guess, about 15 years now, give or take. Let's not add it up. And that's obviously spanned a whole load of time when PR used to be quite different, when it was all about print media and, we were chopping up press clippings and whatnot. And now it's very, very, very different. Things have gone by the wayside entirely, and it's much more of a modern world. So I've been freelance for about sort of 5-6 years now. And that's really been predominantly working with entrepreneurs and business owners that just obviously need help with their PR and marketing, but it's working with those real personalities behind the brand. So I've kind of become more about almost like personal branding and how that affects businesses. But I actually got into it by I wanted to be a journalist. Didn't make it as a journalist, but I wanted to be a journalist originally. I did English at university, loved writing, and I kind of got sent on a work experience to work at my local newspaper. So I'd been kind of doing like features editor for my university paper, and I was all like, oh, this is loads of fun. And then when I realized like the real life journalism, I was like, I just don't know if I'm cut out for it, because they sent me to interview a dog that had a beer named after it. So it was like a dog beer story. And I was just like, I'm just not sure this is like, and I just don't know if I like, and the guy who wrote the story was really clever with all the dog puns and beer puns. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like a different league. So I thought, it's not for me, and ended up being a branch administrator at a shoe company. And I just kind of one day started like sending shoes to magazines, and they were getting in magazines, and then we'd see sales, and I was like, oh, this is really fun. This is like getting something for nothing. Like, this is great. So I kind of I always like loved sort of communications, I guess, but the industry I ended up in was not the one I started out in. But they didn't really do like courses or anything for PR back in the day. It was like you just kind of did your proper subjects, didn't you? And then figured it out later, I guess.
Oh, so you're starting your career journey in PR, working at Murder and Pillow, the footwear brand.
Yes.
And whilst you were there, I did my homework and I was swatting up. And you did everything from like store launches to press days to arranging lookbooks and even launching their e-commerce site. What did you learn about, a 360 communication strategy by working in all of those different avenues?
I learned so much, and I think the thing about it is it's and like anybody listening, it's not always glamorous. It's hardly ever glamorous. Like exactly, like, and it's so misleading. Like, we're at press days and it's gorgeous and there's champagne and it's lovely, and nobody ever talks about the bit where you're dragging boxes around, or like we used to do these shelf strips that you used to have to put into like cardboard envelopes to like send out to the stores to install. I spent an awful lot of time just holding straps of shoes upon like invisible bits of, I mean, you'll have done the same, invisible bits of wire while photographers, you do all these bonkers things, and it's quite fun because it's really varied, isn't it? But it is like quite hard, not very glamorous work. So yeah, I did learn an awful lot. They actually sent me on a PR course, like a 2-day PR course when I was there. So I felt like I'd been given like the keys to the kingdom. I felt like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Like, I know how to do it now. I'm not just winging it anymore, which was a great, like, I just didn't need that much like encouragement, but I was like, that's enough, I'm off. So it was really good. And then all the other stuff, the marketing, like there is so much to it, isn't it? And almost like having to do it all as one person. And I remember the actual website for Murder and Pele it wasn't transactional at all. It just had this lovely girl walking along a canal with her dog and her boots on. And we were like, well, should we do like, something where people can buy from? And me and the EIT guy just did it in the end. We just did it together. Like, let's just put this thing up and see what happens. So people were astonished when it started selling. And even the newsletters, I used to do these shocking newsletters. I mean, God, I'm glad none exist really. But I think I literally just sent them out from me. Like, I'm the branch administrator girl, and I used to just make these horrible graphics up in Photoshop, which I didn't know how to use. And I just like send out emails with everyone BCC'd and hope for the best. But that it's like when you're a smaller company, you do just have to like kind of make do and mend, don't you? And it wasn't Canva back in the day. I couldn't make anything look great. So yeah, you just sort of had to like a bit like learning on the job, I guess. So I suppose like being a bit versatile, and then you do learn all these things about the 360. But yeah, it's much when you go to a bigger company as well, you're like, wow, there's huge teams that do all this stuff. Just different league though when you get to that.
But I think there's a certain benefit in it, isn't there? Because I started out working at smaller like magazines and smaller newspapers, and I found that in contrast to working at those bigger companies, I was able to really get my teeth stuck into doing so much, and I actually learned more working for those smaller brands where it was literally like find your feet. It was like sink or swim. So it must have been just like that, like literally learning on the job.
Totally. And I think the weird thing is that the less money you have, the less budget you have, the more creative you have to be. You're so creative, you're so inventive, you're trying to do things all the time, literally on a shoestring, the irony. But when you go somewhere bigger, you're like, wow, like, it's all, it's not the same as when you're really, really working hard with your money, your budgets, your creativity. And it's quite a nice thing to do, really.
Yeah,
I always recommend it, like starting off in a smaller company, like you learn so much so quickly.
I think that's a lot of what students are looking to do now, is actually working with those smaller brands and really helping them get those results from, like, whether you're working on PR or, you're working in like creating their imagery or their social media. It's a really good way to find your feet with what you like doing and learning those key skill sets.
I agree. Yeah, I think, I suppose any experience is great, but if you're in a big team and you're just doing like, the smaller stuff, you just don't get that hands-on experience, do you? So it is really fantastic to get really in there and know you're making a difference as well. That's when you can actually say like, oh, well, I did this today and here's the results, rather than being like a cog in a really big machine that you just have no idea really what's going on half the time.
So you were really pivotal in building the profile of the Jean Queen that is Donna Ryder. And I saw on your Instagram last week that you'd recently celebrated 10 years.
Yes, we had our anniversary. She got me a cake. It was beautiful.
So but, you've been together for such a long time working together, but you must have set out goals for the brand when you first started working together. Like, where did you even begin?
Well, I always knew, when I met Donna, I knew she was a firecracker to start with. So I think that in itself really helps, because sometimes you are working with businesses that are like, I don't want to have my face out there. I don't want to do any PR. I want to hide in a box, go and do it all. And that's it's not impossible, but it's a lot harder. If you've got a brand where people don't want to do it, it is just harder. That's all. So it's not impossible. It's just a bit harder. So as soon as I met Donna, I knew that this was not the kind of person I was dealing with here. She's very, very, I would always say like she's almost good copy. Like she's good at like sound bites. She knows, she speaks in normal language. She's not ridiculous. And she's got that thing where when you're trying jeans on, she'll be like, oh, I've got that bit there. Like I just do this. Or she's really relatable. Yeah. So she's got lots of like amazing skills about her. But when I first started working for her, we were actually a multi-brand retailer, which meant we didn't have our own product at all. So really because we would send like maybe J brand jeans out to a magazine and they would perhaps credit J brand jeans from Net-a-Porter. And you're like, great, that's total waste of time. And the product would be out in the business for 2 weeks and it's all stock because we don't have samples. So I'd come from a real like world of like having loads of samples, loads of stuff I had at my disposal. And then I was like, okay, basically I don't have that anymore at all. So the real strategy there was to work with Donna as an influencer herself, before influencer was even really a word. Mm-hmm. But she was the one that people were going to be listening to. It was about her edit, how she said that you should wear jeans, all her her knowledge, her edit, what she was buying for the next season was going to be a bit of a game changer. So we just worked our socks off, promoting her as the Jean Queen and as the person to go for all that knowledge, and it paid off. I mean, I can't tell you, at like our heyday or whatever you call it, like we like 8-page spreads in Hello magazine, we'd have 4 pages in Glamour, like it was all the time. And then we launched our own brand, and it was really weird actually. We kind of went through this thing where we almost had to start again, and I think that was quite surprising to me, because I was like, oh, we've got it all nailed. This is fine. We're just launching a brand. It's fine. And then I realized, I was like, oh, it's totally new to everyone again. And having to start again from scratch and knock on all of the doors all again. And, you know, because people were like, oh, yeah, whatever, we're not bothered about that. If you're not giving me J brand or talking to me about frame, we're not as bothered. And that was just, yeah, it was quite almost like humbling to have to just do it all again. And we did, like, you know, I'd say probably the first 5 years I worked with Donna was on multi-brand and on her profile. And the second 5 years was then establishing her own brand of denim. And now, I mean, it's doing amazingly. Like, she couldn't be doing better. And it's just, it just takes that time sometimes, which I think is hard to imagine when you see people that are really doing well. And people say to me all the time, how does Donna do it? How? And it's like, she works really hard, and nobody wants that answer. They want like, well, she just, you know, took this magic bullet. And it's not like that. It's like, it was like 10 years of hard graft. She's been there every day, you know, wears the product, loves the product, is the product. And that's the, you know, end result of that. So she's a fascinating case almost of, you know, working with that public profile, I guess. She's done amazingly at it.
She's incredible. I interviewed her for Finding Fashion last year, and her knowledge is astounding, and how hands-on she is with the business. She seems to know absolutely everything about everything. And as a result of that interview, I bought this amazing leopard print jacket from her. I was like, I need that in my life. And it's literally one of my most favorite pieces in my wardrobe as a result. So there we go.
Fantastic. Yeah, she knows those like little pieces that make people feel special. And I think that's like, yeah, it's always been her speciality. She's very good at that. Yeah,
she's amazing. So generating PR coverage is obviously huge to building a brand reputation, like what you did with Donna Ryder. How do you, because obviously you then, like you say, you had to then go around and like knock on those people's doors again and almost reintroduce Donna to a brand and as a brand to those media titles. How do I go about identifying what publications you want a brand to be seen in?
Well, I'm always really old school about this, because I always think, because when I started out, I didn't really have like the Gorkanas or the diary directory. I think we might have got the diary directory eventually. And then years later, obviously, I had the red pages and, you know, it was everywhere. But in the beginning, it was literally a case of getting the magazine out, looking for the person who wrote things and sending them an email or you know, writing to them or whatever. Back in the day, I mean, crikey, actual letters. But that's how I used to do it. So I never used to use anything really fancy. And I think that's still a good tactic today, especially if you're new and you're starting out. And they are expensive databases, aren't they? Let's face it. Like, if you want to get to someone, it's quite expensive. But you can look in a magazine, find a journalist, and people are so good on Instagram and Twitter these days. You know, I can pretty much get to know a journalist without even having to like pick up the phone, by just looking through their Instagram, seeing what they like, seeing what they don't like, looking what they're writing about. Which sounds a bit stalkery actually, doesn't it? But it's been really, really useful, like in this modern day and age, to get to know that. So yeah, I always literally buy the magazines you want to be in, find the page you think, oh, I could sit on that page, I can see my product there. It's, you know, because sometimes, like, you know, it might not fit, you might just, it'd be the wrong price point for them, or you know, it's just literally, it's not going to be right. So it's really worth like literally picking it up and reading it, rather than just sort of sending out blanket emails or anything like that. So that's how I used to go about it. I mean, me and Donna used to like have like a big target list, I guess, of like where we'd like to be. And it's also, I suppose, worth knowing that once you've been in one, if it's a big feature, you can't be in their competitors for a little while. So there is a little bit of sort of almost picking your favorites, I guess, sometimes. And you know, it's a bit like a chess game, I suppose, isn't it? You have to be a bit strategic about it. So but it depends what stage of your journey you're at. You know, if you're brand new, you're going to kind of want to bash on every door, aren't you? And get to know as many people as possible. But I mean, it's probably a little bit of a weird time now, because with lockdown, you can't exactly go and meet anybody. So it really is just doing it through digital channels, I guess. So it's a bit of a different one at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the brands that you work with have really switched up kind of where they want to be seen? You know, because so many different magazines and different platforms and different blogs, you know, they have their different readerships. How do you kind of work out your favorites, as it were, of where you would want a brand to be seen?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. I think sometimes it comes back to like the history as well that you've got with that magazine or newspaper, because you'll know, like, it's all about relationships, isn't it? So if you've got a great relationship with an editor or something like that, it really does play into that, because, and especially as the like kind of, I was gonna say, older you get, the more experience you get, you know, it does come down to that sometimes, that you've got or it's past results as well, you know, like when I first started working with a smaller brand and they got a piece in the Times, and I think they'd got £8,000 of the sales in that day, and it had not really been like that at all, and we're suddenly like, okie dokie, that's our that's our guy then, that's where he is, and you like suddenly you get these great things where you're like, okay, right, big signposts. So like you do kind of, as you go along, don't you, you get that kind of thing where you're like, oh right, oh well, we sold out of this because it was in there, and it does really help to get those things as you go along, and then you can really benchmark where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. So you talked earlier about kind of selling, you know, Donna, as it were, as a brand, you know, as a profile. And there's a huge amount of conversation at the moment about storytelling of a brand, and you know, how you get consumers to engage with the brand via storytelling. What does storytelling actually mean to you? And how do you even go about identifying what a brand story really is?
I love storytelling. I think it's my favorite bit about working with any brand, and especially if it's a brand that hasn't had PR before, and you're like, oh, fun, like you get to go in there, and it's basically like storytelling is as old as time, isn't it? You know, we've got all these stories that, you know, we tell ourselves, that, you know, we use to relate to each other, that we use to form relationships, you know, and that's no different from like people telling each other stories to brands telling stories. And I think essentially it comes down to like finding that USP, that thing that makes you really different. And that's a lot of the time what you're looking for when you go to a brand. So like, for example, Donna really was that brand's USP. There were other places that sold denim. There were other department stores that sold denim. There were even other boutiques that sold denim. But there wasn't anyone with Donna's pizzazz that was selling denim. There was no one like as, you know, forthright and engaging and you know, brilliant with, you know, people and journalists. There was no one like her, so she became like our USP. And then the story sort of almost forms around it, doesn't it? Like, why did she do that? Why did she open a denim brand? Like, what did it mean to her, and what problem is she trying to solve? So you kind of end up with this, like, all these layers of things that come from it, and it never, I still find things out from Donna that I don't know 10 years later. And I think that's the, you know, the beauty of it, that the story doesn't really change, but it's so layered, and you find out something new all the time. But I love storytelling. Like, anybody, just, you know, if they're starting out and they're thinking about it, think about your journey, think about why you want to do things, what, you know, what is your legacy that you want to leave, essentially. Yeah. Like, what's the story that you're going to want people to tell about you when, you know, in years to come. So think about it like that if you can.
So building contacts is key as a PR, and it's no longer just about kind of like the fashion magazines and the fashion editors that, you know, you spoke of when you first started out, but there's so many people to reach now, from influencers to stylists, bloggers, like, and then as well as that, like consumer press, but also B2B press as well. How do you even go about building contacts in so many different sectors?
It sounds exhausting when you say it like that. It's really funny, actually. Me and Lorna Lux, the influencer, we did a talk about it a few years ago, and she was talking about it being a bit like the film Point Break, and I'd actually only seen it this weekend, so I'm gonna bring that in. And the thing about Point Break is that rather than, like, it's almost like Keanu had to get in with the surfers, didn't he? He had to like be in, you know, in the zone with them all and networking with them, but like he had to become them almost to get in with them. And I think her point obviously is that if you want to get in with an influencer, you need to be chatting to the influencer, like, you know, putting comments on, watching their lives, you know, maybe DMing them about other things, not just trying to sell things. And I think it's a very good point. It is very much like, you don't just, there's a guy called David Meerman Scott that also talks about social media and stuff as like a cocktail party, and I think it's the same thing. You don't just walk into a cocktail party and start shouting about how great you are. You know, you have a few drinks and you chat to people normally, and you build it up slowly. And so I think relationships, and, you know, it is all about networking, but sometimes it's not necessarily overnight, and you're not going to just become like best mates with like an editor without, perhaps years of being, in their sphere, I suppose, and networking with them in a more sort of gentle manner. But it is really key, and it is, like you said, it's very broad. Like, it can be very broad, and especially if you're working across different subject areas. Say you're working with a menswear brand and a women's wear brand, that's going to be a even bigger pool. But definitely being, working in your industry, I think, I hate to say, being on social media is really important, but it's really quite useful. I think that when I was in the early days, there was only really LinkedIn, and people didn't share anything on LinkedIn, did they? They're like, that wasn't the point. But now, like, if you want to be engaging with the editor, you can pretty much be commenting on every single photo they do, and they're going to notice you, because you're going to be probably putting something constructive. So it's a lot of people, and just working out who your really important people are, and probably being a little bit brave and getting yourself out there, because there's, like, you all know, there's, like, I mean, and it takes years, doesn't it? Like, we all know it's a long game, and assistants become editors, and the people work in the industry for a really long time, so it's actually quite nice, isn't it? Like, you do all grow up together a bit.
Yeah, like, that's exactly what I was just going to say, is actually you really do grow up with people, because there's people now who I know in the industry who are head of PR at different companies, and we were like assistants together, or we interned at like More magazine or something like that together. So you do really like get to know people throughout the industry. So it's so true what they say, isn't it, that it, for an industry that is so big, it's so small.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, I always struggled with it in the beginning, I think, was I was always a bit scared. So I was always like, oh God, I've got to be like really professional with journalists and don't like be normal. And it's almost like the opposite is actually true. Like, you being friends with journalists is like, or any influencer, whoever, is like the aim of the game. So don't be like uptight and stuff. Like, you can be a bit vulnerable with them. You can be a bit normal and just talk about normal things, because that's just relationships. It's friendship, really, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Definitely. So with your job, obviously you having an understanding of the media market is really crucial. And like you say, with like social media, it's massively expanding and an increasing rate all the time. How do you kind of go about kind of keeping up to date and really understanding kind of how that media market really grows?
I mean, I kind of want to say, like, I put my head in my hands and cry every time something comes out like that. Like, you do feel a little bit like sometimes you feel like you've got to grips with something, and then something new comes along, and it is quite like, you do have to keep getting back up again and be like, okay, Clubhouse is not going to break me. And there is a lot going on all the time, and it is the kind of industry where you never tick it off. Like, you're never going to be like, oh well, I've done all my social media for today. Because it just doesn't work like that, does it? And I think, especially seeing, like, I think I saw some stats somewhere that said that there used to be like 6 journalists to every 1 PR, and now there's like, it's the opposite way around. I don't know if I've got the stats exactly right, but that kind of thing. So I think you start to realize how vastly evolving the media side is, and how fast paced the sort of social side is. And I always say to brands, be careful not to put all your eggs in the social basket, because they can shut your, I've seen accounts be suspended. I've seen hacking of account. Like, there's all these terrifying things that can happen with your Instagram, and if it's all you've got, you are high and dry. So as much as it's really important, because it's places to touch customers, like touchstones all the time, you've got to look after like your number one as well, which is your own business, your own website, and your own database, like your own newsletter as well. So there's quite a lot when you take it all together. It's a lot of moving parts. But keeping up to date with it, I've definitely, by working in it and, kind of almost following people in that sector, people really love sharing like updates and news. And half the time, that's how I find out, when Instagram are talking about taking away the share button, it's from another person who's an Instagram coach. And I'm like, oh, crikey. But like, it's really good to keep as up to date as possible, because it is changing so fast. Like, for example, probably like Reels being so massively important out of nowhere, and being able to then take that and run with it on behalf of brands or influence their thinking, or it's really, really important to stay up to date with it. And yeah, I don't think there's ever been a time when things have moved quite so rapidly, because in the day, like, we were almost practically faxing things. It was taking taking a while, whereas now it's like an update overnight and everyone's going, okay, let's change everything then, because we now got to do it in video. But I suppose knowing the general trends, like, just help. You're never like too far behind. It's just sometimes you've got to do a bit of like left and right, shall we say, a little bit of shifting.
Have you seen how that's been really mirrored in what your PR clients really want from you in terms of like strategy and storytelling?
I think for sure. What surprised me the most was because I am a traditional PR, as in like I loved print media. Like there's nobody going to be happier about being in a print publication than me. Like I'm doing cartwheels and everything. And to see that sort of become less important to brands was quite a sad thing for me. Like I found that it's probably in the last, I struggle with it to a point where I did a marketing course, Seth Godin's marketing seminar, because I was so stuck of where is my career going? Like, what does it mean that, my clients don't necessarily see this as important anymore, still important, but not as important. Mm-hmm. Like, where am I? What does that mean? And the outcome of that whole soul searching course I did was basically that, like, I'm still a storyteller, I'm still a communicator, but it's just in a different medium, and it's always going to be evolving. Like it's never going to go backwards. Yeah. So I had to like make peace with that. My 4-page spreads might be over for a bit, that kind of thing. So yeah, it definitely has evolved. And yeah, what you see from brands is that they want you to spend time where they see the most value. And I think for brands, predominantly, they see most value coming from Instagram if they're a fashion brand. I think at the moment, it's probably not mirrored in all industries, but particularly in that one, it's a big one.
Mm-hmm. And that brand message that you spoke about earlier, and the storytelling, which you're so passionate about, really does need to almost act like a brand DNA, doesn't it? And literally like thread through absolutely everything that a brand does. When you're working with a new client, how do you work with that company to really analyze like what that brand DNA is and, really harness its potential?
Yeah, there's a lot of like almost sort of statistical things you can do, like looking at if they're existing already and they just haven't got kind of PR or a strategy or whatever in, then it's going and looking at their data, looking at their Google Analytics, looking at their competitors, all those kind of things, to start working out where they sit in the market, and especially if price points involved. Are they luxury? Are they not? There's a lot of things to weigh up and to look into, and it's about finding like where they are the only one at something, where they're unique, that unique selling point again. But the other thing I love doing is literally talking to founders, because a lot of the time people, if you say to them, oh, can you like give me your company history, they will give you the like crappiest company history ever. That they'll give you something really basic, when in actual fact their real history is really interesting. And I did it with my client who's Donna's husband, and he's the president of the Restaurant Association. And I've asked him a million times, like, how did you get started? What? And he's like, oh yeah, this, that, and the other was, chef. And you're like, what? And I did a live with him like this. And he told me so many more things, like so many more like stories about people he'd met, and that he got his MBA on the same day that Kylie Minogue did. And, just all these things that you never mention if you just, brush over it. So I think sometimes like trying to draw that story out of people is a bit like that hard bit. Once you've kind of drawn it out, and then you can like work with it and craft it almost. But yeah, getting it out there is sometimes the hardest bit, I think.
I love him on Instagram. He's always drinking champagne, and the recipes that he makes, like, they seem so like actually realistic, like what you wouldn't necessarily expect from someone who is so like chefy. He's got so much personality. Like, what a power couple.
They are, and they're almost quite similar in a way, because they're both really passionate and really happy. Like, they're really glasses half full. They're about solutions. They're not about probably, you know, they're a really good match. So they're constantly like thinking of new things. They're yeah, it's really nice that passion and creativity doesn't come along very often. And then because at one point he didn't even really have a Instagram channel at all, because we were just doing like really company stuff, and it was all about the business and the private dining events we were running. So it's all about suits and, you know, very professional. And then here he is in lockdown. He was like, oh, what shall we do? And I was like, well, you know, why don't you do some cooking in the kitchen, you know, with Donna? And he was like, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. And this came back, and I'm like, oh my God, he's got like, where's this energy come from? And he's got his outfit, and he's really like, he's stylish every day. Like, that's the kind of person he is. And it just brought more of him out. It's amazing. Like, I'm really pleased for him, for his journey, actually, because I didn't see it coming. And I think almost lockdown forced this sort of inner change. And it's been fantastic to watch transformation. And I think everyone loves a transformation as well. Like, you know, him kind of coming out of nowhere, and then, you know, we love a story. Again, it's Donna's husband, isn't it? So there's a lot to go at.
Oh, I love him. He's so good. He just makes me want to drink champagne though all the time, though, which not really.
The enabler.
So when you do start working with new clients, obviously they give you a budget that they want to work to, but they really want to know that that budget's going to benefit their business. How do you kind of measure the success of a campaign? You mentioned earlier about kind of seeing things sell out, but how do you actually kind of create and kind of justify that return of investment?
Yeah, I love a bit of ROI. I mean, in the olden days, it was actually almost a bit easier, because we used to have, like, I used to work for a company called Mamas and Papas, and that was a massive nursery brand. And we used to have lots of KPIs, but they were all worked out based on how much coverage we got. So if you got a page in Stella magazine or whatever, you would get the equivalent money would go on however much that would have cost to advertise. So sometimes it'd be like £60,000, like, oh, I've got 60,000. So that was like, you could literally put a value on it. And it has definitely, things have shifted a lot now because of the online space. So there's almost a lot more things you can track. Because if you're working with an influencer, or if you do get that media coverage still, it doesn't necessarily have that same weight anymore, because there's a lot of different things going on. But definitely it's the best thing to do is to set out goals in the first place. So, you know, either where people want to be or what they're trying to achieve. Sometimes it'll be sales, or sometimes it might even be growth of database, or it might be social media things. I mean, it just depends what their actual goal is to start with, and then working out that way to get there. And it's not about putting ridiculous targets in that you're not going to be able to reach either, because that doesn't, like, if you're literally going to fail every month, no one's going to be happy either. But it's about being realistic about the steps you can make to get there. And, you know, if it was, for example, you desperately just wanted to have numbers on social media, and, you know, you then set out your strategy to be like, okay, not that that's necessarily the thing to go for anymore, which we would all probably say, don't just focus on your numbers. But anyway, just as an example, then yeah, you would start tracking the ways, okay, this kind of post got us the most follows rather than, you know, likes or comments or whatever. This is the one that we want to do. Or, you know, when we collaborated, we did X, Y, and Z. And then it's when you work out what kind of stuff you need to be producing in order to get to where you want to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think social media is obviously so useful in kind of being able to directly track the success of kind of brand strategy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And when you are creating that like kind of social media strategy, it doesn't just help build a brand reputation, but like you say, it is about return of investment. And it's actually really important to kind of think, right, this needs to generate sales now, because that's ultimately what we're all here for, is to make some money.
Totally. And that's where Google Analytics is great as well. I mean, there's nothing you can't really see in that, like, you know, you're going to be naked in there. Yeah. So it's, I love a good poke around Google Analytics, because even, you know, you can surprise yourself with what's working as well. Like, no end of times I've been a bit surprised by something, you know, and on Instagram as well. I think I've a really basic, boring shot on Instagram had got nearly 100 saves for a brand the other day. And I was like, why though? And it's like, it's really interesting to always have a good look around, because there's always something that's that'll stand out to you that you can then replicate later.
Yeah. Do you really try and emphasize that with your clients then, that they should really be tracking, the kind of successes on social media to feed forward? Because that's ultimately what people want, right? Is to create content that they know is successful.
Yeah, I always say like tweak and repeat, because sometimes it might not be the perfect result, but if you're getting in the right direction, and also there's no harm in as Donna would say, biffing things off. Like we often are like, okay, that didn't work, let's not do that again, and it's fine. Like you don't have to keep bashing away at it because you want it to work. It's fine to just accept that things don't work and make mistakes. I think she said on her live to you, like, you're better off making mistakes because then you learn and go on to something else. And even down to stupid things like, I don't know, try posting 3 times a day as opposed to once, and just see if your customers hate it or not, because you don't know until you try it. And I think there's a lot of trial and error these days as well. I mean, definitely like taking track of the numbers and everything, but it is perfectly fine to just try and fail and try something else.
It's a recipe for life, I think.
I think it really is.
Learning from your failures is key.
Yeah, not getting put off. I mean, resilience, I think in PR terms, if I was going to teach anyone anything, it would be resilience, actually, because I tried to get a job in London about 1 million times. I cannot tell you how many interviews I went for, and I didn't just like send off like applications either. I used to like mock up press releases for whatever brand I was going for the interview for. Like I used to go like the extra level, and it took me years to get the job in London, years. And then even when you get the job in London, you're approaching journalists every day that have got 1 million emails or whatever in their inbox. And it is so easy to get put off and to be put down and to be scared. And like being resilient is probably the number one skill you need, because you just have to be quite strong with it. It's not personal, it's just, sometimes it's not quite the right fit or whatever. And, but it does happen. Like eventually the door opens or something happens, and, putting the effort in, it will pay off in the end. But I think that's the thing that's probably, it's a hard thing to learn, but once you've got it, I mean, it's still hard, but yeah, try and be resilient.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good tip. I'll take that on myself. So influencer marketing is obviously another huge part of your job. And some of my students at the moment are working on some brand projects where, they're looking at kind of micro and macro influencers. And it's interesting to see that so many brands now are kind of taking on a bit of a blended approach, and that, they kind of see the benefit of both macro and micro influencers. From your standpoint, working so closely with brands, what do you think it is that they look for? Like, do you think that they see benefit in either or?
Yeah, I definitely think, because I do work with clients that prefer to almost work with smaller influencers, because sometimes the brands themselves, are more kind of, if they're smaller brands and they maybe are ethical, sustainable, and they want to work with the right kind of influencers. So it's not just about like numbers and sales, it's about finding an influencer who really believes in those brand values. And a lot of the time, if you're very, very focused, then it is a smaller pool and smaller niche, because you're finding someone that's an authentic match, rather than going to Kim Kardashian and saying, can you just vlog this for us? Because also it won't resonate with your audience. If your kind of customer is somebody who really values sustainable and ethical and handmade, Kim Kardashian's probably not going to be their bag. So there's a lot to weigh up when you're working with influencers, I think, and brands. Donna actually we don't do any paid stuff with Donna. It's always been organic, which has been like the most lovely way to work with anybody, because it's just so genuine. And that's been a result of all that work built up. I know it would be much, much harder if we were starting now, for example, to get that relationship. It's more like, I think we probably started at the right time, and then all that hard work has come through. And also the product, like if the product's really strong, you've got for example, we're selling sort of designer denim jumpsuits, which is a really desirable product. But if you've got a less desirable product, then again, that might be, you know, if you're selling kitchens, for example, you know, you might have a slightly different sort of problem or different thing you're trying to solve. So it really just depends. And I would probably say like a mix of influencers if you can. But it really depends on the product and the brand you're working with. But I did a lot of like big celebrity seeding back in the day when it was like Mamas and Papas. And that, I mean, it probably has changed an awful lot now. But back in the day, we used to just like literally find the agent, send the agent an email and say, hiya, would you like, you know, congratulations that so-and-so is pregnant. Can I send them a box of goodies to say congratulations? And I would literally just send them a box, and then we would wait for the pap shots. So there'd inevitably, hopefully, be some pap shots. And then, so for example, Jessica Alba took her little girl to a park, and she was head to toe in Mamas and Papas. And I bought the paparazzi shot for £500 for worldwide usage, and we got all these like full pages in magazines, and it was the most exciting thing ever because I'd only paid £500 for it. And it, like, that was back in the day though. Like now it's totally different. Like you might get your pap shot still, and you might be able to buy that still, but they're also putting it on Instagram and doing a selfie with it, and it's a completely different ball game. And a lot of people are now being paid an awful lot of money for those type of shots. So it is definitely very different these days to when I was younger back in the day.
Do you think it's got harder then to kind of seed those things to celebrities? Because obviously brands still see benefit in seeding celebrities and dressing celebrities to, you know, create that clout and cut through the noise ultimately. Do you think it's harder? Is the process changed in terms of celebrity seeding?
I don't think it probably hasn't changed so much. It's probably more like people's expectations might be a lot higher. And by that I just mean I used to have quite a big budget in order to make those things happen. So I could quite happily send I don't know, quite a nice size box of things on the off chance. And it wasn't really expected that would always land. One, I'd have to get the pap shot. One, it'd have to be like possible for me to buy it and distribute it, and it would have to be a great pap shot as well. You can't just have them looking upset or sad, like, you know, it'd have to be like a certain thing. So there was an awful lot of luck involved in that, which people kind of accepted. Whereas now I feel like the people think that if they send something to a celebrity or an influencer, that they want it to be featured. And that's quite hard, like, as you will know also, like, without paying, without having like a contract, nothing is guaranteed at all. And I think that's what people at smaller brands or new starters don't necessarily understand, that because you just presume that if you send it to them, they will wear it, do you a nice post and tag you in it. And obviously it's a bit of a longer game than that. And it's not that can't happen. Like, of course it can happen. But, you know, it is a monetized thing these days. People have got a lot more followers. So unless you've got a fantastic relationship with them, which is where that relationship building comes from. Like, if you do desperately want Lorna Lux to wear something of yours, and, you know, you can, you know, she answers all her DMs, like, you can easily like chat to her for a few months and then say, hey, Lorna, I love your style. I've made this for you. Would you like it? And then that's her decision whether to accept it or not. So it's still possible. It's just, I think people expect different things from it these days, and it looks easy. I think that's the thing. People think it looks easy. The influencers are just raking it in, and it's just a quick selfie, and it's not. If they are getting paid deals, there, you know, there'll be contracts a mile long with, you know, what they've got to do and how they've got to do it and how they've got to tag it, and so they've got a lot of parameters already to deal with. And then, you know, getting free things in the middle of it might not work out. So you've got to almost be prepared to write that stock off. Which I think in this day and age is quite a hard thing to do. You know, we're not probably in the game anymore of just sending things out and hoping for the best, in a good way, I suppose. But yeah, I think it's definitely changed over the years.
And so what about events? Obviously, events is a super exciting part of your job, but naturally it's changed at the moment. But there's so many brands that when you're working with them, they do want these different types of events that are really innovative, like they stay true to the brand message and that brand DNA. How do you start kind of conceptualizing an innovative event that kind of is on budget for a brand?
Do you know what's so funny? When you say that, I always think to myself, when people ask about events, I always think, oh, I don't really do events. And it's such a lot. I've done so many events over the years, and you just, I don't know, you just feel like, oh, they're just press days, or they're just, you forget that they're like, that's like a lot of the job. With I think Mamas and Papas was probably the first time I'd really dealt with like bigger budgets. And we were doing things like, ridiculous things like suspending parking bays so that we could like get all these trucks in, and there were like 20 mannequins and lighting systems and giant posters of everything. And I mean, that was bonkers times when we had like a lot more budget, like I said, I suppose. But that almost did feel a little bit extra, like a bit too much for a press day, I guess. And we also did like smaller scale as well, so it just shows you that there's different types of events. There's huge events. There's, I mean, Nth Degree, Bobby Dazzler's company, they have 350 people events at the Savoy, and that's a really big event. So there's definitely different scales. Like you can have tiny small sit down dinners which are really intimate and achieve a completely different thing, or you might be aiming at like getting stacks of people through the doors to hear what you've got to say. So it really just depends again what your aim is. And actually, I'm not even sure which kind I prefer. Like sometimes the ones where they're really big and they've got a lot of people there, there's a lot of pressure because a lot of things can go wrong, basically. But that's where like working with a bigger team is a lot more. That's really important. Like you've got a lot of people working on the sound or the stage, and making it look amazing. And it might be that I'm only responsible for part of it. So that definitely makes it easier when you're working with a bigger team. But when you're working with a smaller team, it's really about those the people that are coming, really, and making sure that those people are really looked after, and then they've got like something to share, something to take away. So if they come and there's like they just come to a dinner but that's about it, and there's nothing for them to engage with, then that's kind of where you're starting to think, okay, well, what can we do that makes it a bit more special? Like I mean, back in the day we used to do like manicurists and hair things. I mean, you've probably been to millions of them. Like you used to do everything it took to get people there. Like I remember Mamas and Papas, I used to send cars for people to come. I used to promise them the earth. I would do cartwheels. Like the people coming to your event is the most important thing, and over invite, because everyone always cancels.
Yeah.
But it's a fun part, but it's just, it can like almost be like a stressful time because everything kind of comes together and it's all in that one day.
Do you think that the future of event planning within the PR space is going to be really different in the future, or do you think it will come back to the way it was?
I feel like it is going to be different. I don't know how much we can keep really doing those sort of actual physical press days in some ways. It does feel a little bit outdated now to be sort of spending lots of money on rolling things out, and I mean, actually maybe the bigger brands will be able to maintain it, but possibly the format might have got a bit more difficult for the smaller brands and for the sustainable brands, especially that are coming through. I kind of do. It does feel, I don't know how you feel. Do you feel like it might be a bit outdated, the whole press day thing now? Does it feel a bit, or is it still like essential actually, maybe?
I mean, I've been to quite a few like digital press days over the last few months, and some of them are so innovative. Like I went to a lingerie press day and they had set it up it was like The Sims, and that's a really basic way of describing it. But they were able to talk you around like a different press room and talk you through individual products, which wasn't as inspiring as it would be if you were actually there. But I think that brands are going to change up the way that people engage with them, and maybe I mean, you only have to look at Fashion Week, where it's not just about a traditional catwalk show anymore, but a presentation, or thinking about that brand messaging and doing a podcast and people engaging with your brand that way rather than just
the obvious,
I suppose. So I think it's kind of like an exciting place to be. I mean, obviously, I really like getting manicures and getting my getting facials and dinners at press days and stuff. So I hope it goes back to that. But
yeah, I think it might do. I think, and yeah, it's just really interesting, isn't it? It is a real time of change, and even looking at how inventive the bloggers have been about doing reels for Fashion Week.
Yeah,
I'm like, God, that's clever. And I've got like a lot of time, like you said, I think maybe it's innovation that's going to be the winner here, because we have probably been doing similar things for a long time, and now we've had to stop and think about it. And there will inevitably, especially in fashion, be less money because the bigger brands have, suffered, and there's, less probably money about in general. So it'll be a very creative year, I think, to see how we can pull it all back together and make people excited about it again.
Yeah, I hope so. So another thing that you've worked on in the past is kind of charity partnerships. And some of my students at the moment, some of my beauty students, are working on a project where they align a brand to a charity.
Mm-hmm.
And you worked on a project with Donna Ryder called Jeans for Jeans. And you guys arranged like a 5K run in Hyde Park. And it was amazing. I was reading up on your website that you raised over like £50,000, which is incredible. My students at the moment are in a position where they're like aligning a brand with value, with a charity, and kind of aligning their brand values. How do you go about planning those collaborations so that they're really seamless and they seem really authentic?
We actually, we worked with Jeans for Jeans charity with that, because Donna was actually a patron. So that kind of really helps already when you can, really talk to them and use all their assets and, make sure you're all supporting each other literally, because especially if you want to reach out for trade press and you're actually all joined up, that's like, it's a lot easier then. I think we worked a bit with Drapers and Vogue supported, and it was a really nice event, and a lot of people supported us. And we actually, the kind of mechanic we used to get, so it was like your Donna Ryder team. We all had Donna Ryder t-shirts. So we got a designer called Simeon Farrer to print these t-shirts, and I can't remember, it said something funny on the back, and it's escaping me right now, but because like it was all for charity, everybody would kind of pitch in. So then we all started looking like this Donna Ryder army on in Hyde Park when we were doing the run. So it kind of had that real like team mentality to it. And Donna also managed to get brands to sort of donate things to make big prizes for people. So the more money individual people raised for the charity, the more they would get as a goodie bag, which was filled with all this great stuff from brands. So it was quite complicated from when I was sat in the chair doing it. It was all very complicated because things kept arriving in the office and I had to like sort everything out. But as a person doing that run, they were quite motivated to raise as much as possible. And I think that's what led to the big donations. And we were also really lucky that we pulled in some celebrities as well. We were doing Donna Air ran with us, so Donna Ryder and Donna Air, like it's all lot of Donnas. So it was really good. It was kind of perfect from that messaging thing. And then we had a big picnic at the end. And so it kind of really did feel like, in terms of that storytelling, like creating that community. Mm-hmm. And we would send out emails to the team and tell them where we were at. And we had quite a big, we must have had a few months run up to it, I think, in hindsight. But yeah, we really did we worked on like a 3 month. We knew the target from the beginning, like we knew how much we wanted to raise. And I think that's quite important actually, just having that like number. And I think we even might have known like what it might buy, because that would have helped us say like, right guys, if we get to this, it's going to be that, and just making it super clear. But yeah, anything working with charities it's really worthwhile. I always feel like it's such a worthwhile activity. And we did something the year after as well with them, where it was Donna did like a marathon walk and then a big cycle ride to Brighton and then something else as well. So yeah, it was a good few years and we were working together. It was really fun.
They're such good initiatives to work on, aren't they? Because ultimately you kind of, the brand and the charity, they use each other's platform, don't they, for like mutual benefit. And that was such a nice one to see. Like it felt like the Donna Ida, the Jeans for Jeans, it just felt almost quite intimate in a way. It almost felt like a bit of a family sort of vibe. Exactly. That felt really true to the brand, I thought. So,
and I think that does happen with charity initiatives a lot. I'd worked with, when we were, I was at Mamas and Papas, they had Midwife of the Year awards, and it was the sort of same thing by the end of the event, where the midwives had been nominated by these women who'd had like experiences, maybe difficult experiences or amazing experiences, And then all these midwives would come together, and then, you know, one of them would win this award, and everybody would pretty much be in tears by the end of it.
Oh my God, I feel upset now.
You all felt so connected. So yeah, it's very much like when you're working in something like that, it's so rewarding, and yeah, it's quite it's very emotional things to work on.
Mm-hmm. So you talked earlier about doing a bit of a marketing course, and your website I was checking out, you share some really such useful like resources and articles, which is so useful to those kind of new to the industry, but also who are looking to kind of gain some PR support. Why do you think it's important to carry on educating yourself with kind of all these new initiatives and new resources?
I think I've always thought people are really confused about what I do and what it means. And even we had a consultant come in once to Don Ryder, and he called me the dark arts, and he was like, just no one knows what you do. And I thought, how can you not? Like, I'm here every day, like I do all these reports, like, but there's something about it that seems really like, because I think also like if you've got a piece of coverage coming or you're doing something really amazing, you daren't talk about that until it's in print. Like, unless it's in print, I'm not counting it. So there's that real mentality of like, you do tend to like be quiet about things because you don't know, do you? Like, you know, it could get pulled, things could happen. So I've always been a big believer that people don't really understand it. And I think especially as things have evolved, and it kind of makes even less sense now, because people are like, oh, does it involve social media, or doesn't it? Is it just advertising? And it's so murky. I mean, I even get confused. It's murky. So I set out to just try and like explain it really. And my kind of motivation with the whole website was to be honest about it, because people would literally say to me, oh, did you see your company in the magazine? I'm like, like, did you think it just jumped in there on its own? And it's that thing where people, I think, do think things just jump in there on their own. And so, I mean, every now and again they might do, but other times they take an awful lot of work and planning and things that, you know, you see in the media all the time, like they take a lot of planning, don't they? So I always just like to try and help people understand how much work, I guess. And that's why doing interviews with people, and so to shine that light on all these different people that work in this industry that you don't really see, and it just comes out in what you see up front. But yeah, I think it's great, and educating yourself. I don't think you can ever stop really, and especially now that I don't think you'd like to think you're done, wouldn't you? Like, oh, I'm done with my education now, don't need to do that anymore. But the amount of things that come out and change, and you know, even just every time I listen to a TED talk, I'm like, oh, didn't know that. So I think there's stacks of time for keeping up with things and knowing as much as possible, I think.
Well, you're actually an accredited member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, which sounds incredibly fancy.
It does sound fancy. Oh my God.
Like, what does that actually mean? And how do you think it benefits your professional practice, having that very fancy title after your name?
Well, the CIPR is basically like you said, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. So they're a body that makes sure that we're not doing anything wrong, basically. They're kind of by being a member, I'm upholding their values. So I quite like it from my point of view to know that my ethics and my morals are all in check. And I've got, you know, every time I work with a client, I have a contract, I have a code of conduct that I sign up to. And they're incredibly good at things like keeping us up to date with all the different things that are coming through. So like, for example, there's loads of webinars or courses and whatnot you can do depending on what you're wanting to skill up in. So like if you're into video maybe, or you know, you want to do some more on ethics or whatever it is, they've got like a stack of people that can help. They also have mentors, and you know, it's also a great place to, I think being a PR, especially if you're a consultant, can possibly be quite lonely. Even when I was in-house, like I was probably sometimes I was like the only one doing that job. So to have other people to bounce off is quite handy. And of course you end up with a lovely network of people that you know in general, but having kind of professional people that you can say, got this problem, can you help me, is a very valuable thing. And even like the legal advice as well, sometimes like, you know, a lot of PR things that, you know, there is lines that can be crossed, and you might want advice on where you stand as a, you know, what advice you should be giving to a client almost. So So yeah, it's a very useful thing to be a member of. So yeah, it's a lot about training and networking.
Do you think it's still important at all times in your career to have, a mentor? Because, so many people that I've spoken to on Finding Fashion interviewing, they've all said, I just really value having a mentor. I think that, that's something that they do throughout their career. Do you have any mentors, or do you have particular people that you kind of bounce ideas off of?
I would say actually Donna's probably like a mentor in a way, like without sort of officially signing up or whatever. And I think as the thing, I'm more that I go along, the more I realize how important it is to perhaps have someone like professionally to keep you on track is probably the right phrase. I do have like a life coach I work with, and I've worked with her for the last 10 years, which initially was about me overcoming confidence issues, which I was, as I was getting more senior, I was like, I can't do it. And so she helped me really overcome a lot of that. And then in turn has helped me to like go freelance, start on my own stuff and be a bit more confident and do things like go on camera and not be as scared. And, all these things that are normal life, but they're just terrifying sometimes. So I think that's been quite crucial to just, I don't know, just helping you overcome any barriers that come up. And everyone has them, and they're all different. They're different for everyone. Anything can become a barrier if you let it. And constantly working on that, I think, is really important. And yeah, having those people around you as well, like the trusted people that you can get some advice from, because things do go wrong. Like they go wrong all the time. And even being able to talk to like your client and saying like, okay, we've done this and it's not gone right, and how should we get out of it and fix it? And I think it's quite important to always have as many people in your team as possible. So it comes back to that network and being friendly with people and normal, and yeah, getting good people around you.
I think there's this misconception, isn't it, that you kind of get to a certain stage in your career and you've completed it and you know exactly what you're doing the whole time, but half the time most people are just winging it. And
yeah,
and everybody makes mistakes throughout their career and everybody's learning. So I think it's such an important thing to be able to do is kind of just bounce ideas off other people, even if it's not actual professional ideas, but from a mental state, just as a support thing. It's such a lovely thing to be able to utilize if you can create that network that you talked about.
Yeah, and getting rid of perfectionism as well. Like I am the worst person on earth for perfectionism, but I wouldn't get anything done. And I think even Donna, like if we looked back, we used to look at every single word and bit of grammar on every blog post and whatnot. And if you want to get somewhere, like you need to be able to let it go a little. I'm not saying completely don't check things, but if you spend the whole time trying to be perfect and worrying about it, or you just won't do anything and it'll hold you back. And I think that's the thing is really hard to do, but try it. And I think that, who is it that says 80% is better than perfect? I think it's Sheryl Sandberg or something. Like somebody says like 80%, like, and get on with it, rather than being like, okay, it's got to be absolutely perfect. I'm not going to do anything until it's completely done, because you just won't do anything. And I think that's another one that Donna likes to live by as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually. I need to take that on. And so on your Instagram and on your Naked PR website, you've got your blog, but you also do a lot of Insta lives with different people from the industry and some really well-respected industry experts in different fields, they're so engaging to watch. Why do you think it's important to kind of be, still like kind of having those conversations with professionals in your field?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose I just absolutely love it for a start. Like I'm so intrigued by, I think it's that storytelling again. I like want to know how you ended up like being acting deputy editor of the Daily Mail. Like what was your path? And, I think it's really, I don't know. I'm interested in how people got there. I think there's that whole thing where people just think people arrive perfect, arrive like I'm here, I'm done. And I'm just fascinated by that path to it and how they got to it. But also I think it's really important to shout out good things. I think we spent an awful lot of time talking about bad things and being negative, and especially like places like Twitter or, sometimes LinkedIn can be a bit like edgy as well, can't it? And just being positive about people and finding out more about them and trying to inspire people to also think, it's a great career and it's something to invest in. It's we don't do very good at doing our own PR.
Yeah.
PRs in the, you know, especially people don't have a clue what we do. It all sounds really wishy-washy. So I think sometimes like trying to talk about it, and especially probably from a journalist point of view, like it probably is a bit misunderstood as well, isn't it? Like everyone, I don't know, just like it doesn't quite know what you do and all the different roles and functions, and you know, it's all cloak and dagger and here's a magazine, you know, it's, you know, you want to just, I like the idea of trying to get to know what you're kind of, what you do and what makes you special, I suppose.
I think it's particularly important now, you know, to be having those conversations, because, you know, there's so many different people out there that who need to be championed. And, you know, that's what I love about doing this is, you know, I'm speaking to people that I might not necessarily have spoken to in this medium. And it's just so nice to like, it's so inspiring, like just to talk to you and like find out where you've come from and like what you do on a day-to-day and the clients that you work for. It's such a nice thing to be able to do, especially when I don't see anyone from like week to week.
It is exactly that, isn't it, as well? And this has really taught us that we really value connection and value face to face. And it does make, like, I always have that thing where I come off one of these and I'm like smiling, I'm like so happy. Like you just don't, you just really, I think we all really miss that like human connection, don't we? It's like going for a really nice glass of wine with someone.
I miss that. So I was reading up on your website, and what I really love about your website, and you touched on this earlier about, is the kind of the notion of kind of being really honest about what it is that you do. And as I was saying, like, what I love about your website is that you seem to have such a genuine desire to help and to kind of break down the misconceptions of kind of the dark arts, as you say, of the PR industry. What do you think is the most important element to being a success in the PR industry?
I'd say these days, I'd probably say after the resilience, probably creativity. I don't think there's anything anymore that doesn't require like an awful lot of creativity. Even when you look at, if you're in the social media side, like looking at, and you know, even when you do your own social media, it's kind of trying to test you, like, you know, how creative can you be with a reel, with a video, and I think that's where this industry seems to be heading. Like it really seems to be more visual, more engaging, and just as creative as possible. And I think that's where we're becoming even more multi-skilled. And you don't have to be everything to everyone or anything, but it's more like just trying to make sure that everything you do is creative, whether it is a PR campaign or whether it is like collaborating with somebody else, or whether it is looking at like video as a medium and how to connect with your audience. Like the things that people are doing now, you know, it's so creative. And anything, I was speaking to Lorna Lux about this as well. She was saying that anything she does that is new, that she hasn't done before, stacks more engagement. Now, like obviously sounds quite obvious, but you can't just stick to the same. You can't go, oh, I've done it now, I've nailed it, I'll just have a snooze, because they'll bring something new out and they'll stop, like, you know, favoring it in the algorithm because they're evil. So there's like everything you do has got to be like that extra level, hasn't it? Like we can't, there's nothing that we can use anymore that's like, oh, we did that last year, let's just do that again. It's sadly those times are over.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Like, it's been such a joy to talk to you, and you've made my Monday evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to seeing who you've got next on your blog and your Insta lives that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care then.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.